very, okay. Hello, everyone. A very good morning for those of our friends who are joining us from countries like Pakistan and India. We have Professor Matthias from Germany, and I think he was discussing that it is earliest morning there. For me in Calgary, it's 10 at night. So I really welcome you, everybody, to this webinar series on Indus water system. So today we have a speaker, Dr. Abubakr Muhammad, who's working as an associate professor and chair of electrical engineering, the founding director of the Center for Water Informatics and Technology, and lead for NCRA, National Agricultural Robotics Lab at LUMS. Since 2008, his group at LUMS has done applied research in robotics, automation, and artificial intelligence with applications to water, agriculture, and environment. He has held visiting positions at other top institutes of the world, including Oxford, ICTP, and COST. He serves on various advisory panels to the government agencies and industry on use of emerging and digital technologies. So Dr. Saab will be discussing today a very important topic from behavior to policy, modeling the socio-hydrology of the Indus Basin for demand management and governance. So I would now invite Dr. Saab to carry on, and I would not take further time. Dr. Saab, over to you.
Ji, Assalamu alaikum, and thank you very much for the invitation. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. I will now try to share my slides. So please give me a cue when you have started to see it. So can you see the slides on the screen now?
Yeah, yes, we can see it.
Okay. So as Dr. Saab kindly introduced me, I am basically based at Lahore University of Management Sciences. There is a Center for Water Informatics and Technology. I'm also affiliated with the NCRA Agricultural Robotics Lab, as well as the Electrical Engineering Department here. And the title of the talk is basically how do we look at these interactions between people, the resource water itself, as well as technology. And then in particular, what we look at today is that how do we go from behavior to some sort of a policy direction? So all of the academic research that we do, focusing on water resources, first of all, looking at how people use water, how they interact with water, and how, of course, in turn, it gets influenced by it. But then what do we take out of it to go to the policymakers and then inform them about how to bring those interventions? So that is mainly the main idea. Going forward, I will actually start by taking cue from the very excellent first seminar of this series, which was given by Dr. Muhammad Ashraf at PCRWR, where he very in a most able way he cataloged the main key challenges for Pakistan's water sector into three parts. So of course there is the whole issue of water resources development. There are issues surrounding water resource management, and then of course how do you look at water resources governance. I will also follow this template, so to speak, and because most of the participants here would be familiar with this sort of a framework. And what we will look at is that in order to provide answers to these challenges, there are many approaches, and the traditional way of providing these answers is very rigid, infrastructure heavy or capital intensive supply driven solutions, like for example building of infrastructure, dams, barrages, irrigation canals, and so on and so forth. And of course this is needed for an emerging economy like Pakistan. There are many issues around it. In the last seminar, we actually looked at one issue that Dr. Sayal was very ably able to present. So that is not my expertise. What I'm going to focus more on is on the demand side of things. So whenever we look again at these issues, whether these are related to water resource development, their management or governance, so people come up with all sorts of ideas and we look at these. So for example, in many places around the world, one of the first places to start with is to talk about water productivity. So we have water. How are we really using that to its full potential? So maybe instead of growing very water intensive crops, we should switch to more high value, high water productivity crops. And this is really the pathway that Egypt took, that Morocco took, that Israel took, and other countries in the world. And we are also thinking about those things. Secondly, in Pakistan, there is always a lot of talk about high efficiency irrigation systems, on-farm water management, if you want to call it. So in the last couple of decades, a lot of investment has really come into drip systems, sprinkler systems, laser leveling, canal lining, and all of these interventions. They can be broadly sort of cataloged as high efficiency irrigation systems. And again, in the academic circles as well as in policy circles, this is an active area of interest. Now, another topic which has recently emerged and has been of very high interest and also of interest to us as well is basically nature-inspired solutions. And these are ideas related to what people broadly call as conservation agriculture or sustainable intensification of agriculture, where using minimal inputs and so essentially it's geared towards making small farming viable as well as keeping the environment sustainable and taking cue from practices which are really out there in the nature. So minimal kind of tilling, mulching, intercropping, raised beds, all of these practices, they come under these broad ideas. And also on the water resources development side of things, people have talked about wetland development and so on and so forth. And I think during your seminar series, hopefully we'll see some of those nature-based solutions as well. Then if you talk to an economist, water price rationalization is a big issue. That again, I would broadly catalog on the demand side of things. People talk about the Abiana, is it rationally priced or not? Again, this is another intervention that people debate very intensively. Another area where we have done quite a bit of work is so-called water accounting, keeping track of where the water is being used, and especially because of the emergence of these technologies, remote sensing, Internet of Things kind of sensors, sensor networks, telemetry, you can actually talk about, or even many companies are now emerging, including some spin-offs that have come up from our own group as well, who are now providing irrigation advisory services. And I think once again, this is a very hot area, hotly contested and hotly debated as well. And people have all sorts of opinions about it. Now, for all of these demand side interventions that people propose, and then they are also taken to government projects as well, there is always this question of whether these interventions will actually work. And the policymakers are seldom sure about, well, you propose a new intervention, well, how will the farmers respond? How will the water users respond? So you bring in a new kind of drip irrigation system, you bring in a laser leveling system, you propose a new nature-based sustainable intensification system that would supposedly save water, or you increase the price of Abiana. You just pick any of these interventions, and of course, this is always a thing on people's mind. So this is where we have a slightly different take on the critical domains for the Indus Basin and the key challenges, where at the center of it, we really think that these interactions between people and the resources themselves and the technology, this should be deeply understood. So we no longer just talk about water, but water in addition to that, land and air, as well as other interactions. So one of the first critical areas that we think that people should pay attention to is in a sort of a very holistic way is the impacts of environmental degradation. So not only just water, but because of, for example, agricultural practices, because of other sanitation practices, the ways that we are living in our cities, what is happening to these resources, and especially this environmental degradation. Secondly, nexus. Again, this is a word that you will hear quite often, but this is really about if you are thinking about optimizing one resource, say energy options, but at the same time you want to meet water demand, but you want to lower environmental footprints at the same time. So these kind of cross optimization between, say, agricultural activities or industrial activities or transportation activities, and so on and so forth. So this is really at the heart of many of these issues. So looking at just water alone there is not enough. Now, finally, disruptive technologies. So it's not just things that are happening in the Indus Basin in our country, but really this big changes which are coming around the world, where many new kind of technologies such as artificial intelligence, nanotechnology, biotech, they are simultaneously enablers. They are actually helping us on many fronts, as I've just mentioned. These, for example, irrigation advisory services that people have started to think about, which are remote sensing and IoT kind of driven, but they are also threats to social stability. So, for example, if you have small farmers, would they be able to adapt to these technologies? The irrigation managers, would they be able to leverage these technologies? And then there is, of course, the whole issue of the misuse of these technologies as well. So in the academic circles, these interactions, they are studied under the broad areas of, say, socio-ecological systems, where people look at how resources and people interact, and also this interaction of technology with people, where socio-technical systems is another area where there's quite a lot of interest. So at the center, we are a small center. We do not do everything that has to do with water, but we have strategically and sort of very in a thoughtful way, we have sort of organized our research around these areas where human-water interactions. This is of prime importance. Part of that I will share with you. Then hydroinformatics. These are the disruptive technologies that I talked to you about. I will not focus so much about the technology part today, but some people who know our work know that we have done quite a bit on that part. And then I think I'll give you a glimpse of some of the work that we have done on the water, energy, food nexus part. But nevertheless, that is again really a hot area in at our lab. And I also just wanted to acknowledge that this is not my individual effort, but really a lot of these are the associated faculty that we have at the center at LUMS from around the campus in various disciplines and centers and departments who are contributing to this, and of course, graduate students and staff members who are contributing to these areas. Okay. Before I go into the main topic of these human-water interactions or the socio-hydrology of water, I would like to just really very quickly capture some of the things that we are doing. So, for example, when I talked about these demand-based interventions, so sustainable intensification is one area where we have been looking at. The economists that we have at our center, they have been looking at these practices and really trying to figure out that what are the ecological footprints, what are the water footprints, what is the economic footprint of these kind of activities, and if we can help scale up these activities at large scales. And some of our technology partners, as well as faculty who are at the center, they have also been looking at these practices from a digital angle. So at LUMS, we have a digital lab, a living lab, as we call it, for plant phenotyping, for informatics and farm budgeting, where we have, once again, a lot of gadgets, robots, sensors, and software systems for doing measurements and comparing practices and churning out data. And what we focus on quite a bit is that many of these are geared towards the challenges of really smallholder farms. So this is one of the main questions that we have on our minds, whether these smallholder farms, once again, in the wake of all of these technological interventions, these new possibilities where they will remain productive, whether it will just remain as a subsistence activity, or these smallholder farming can be turned into profitable businesses, and so on and so forth. Now, some of the products of this kind of thinking is already out. We have, for example, this is one showcase of soil moisture sensing. This falls under the idea of these high efficiency irrigation systems, where using these sensors, the farmers can get an idea of the moisture content in the soil in real time, and based on that, they can make decisions on when to irrigate and how much to irrigate. And we have now hundreds of active installation sites at small and medium-sized farms all around Punjab, mostly in Punjab, where we have done this work, and many industries as well, and food companies and agricultural companies who are partnering with us on this initiative. And just to close the thread on this technology part, we are also at the forefront of many developments on hydrological models, machine learning, robotics, Internet of Things, numerical hydrology. How does that interact with, or how the presence of these technologies can leverage new ideas into numerical hydrology, and so on and so forth. Physics-guided machine learning is another area. Again, if there are students here or researchers who are looking for new ideas for research, that again is something which is emerging from the center, and we are paying attention to cutting-edge research on that. And in fact, I would just like to pause and just advertise that today we are launching our own webinar series, which is on models, learning, and sensing in hydrology. So this is a webinar that will happen around 6 p.m. Pakistan time, and the inaugural seminar is being given by Dr. Dara Intakhabi from MIT. He was the lead for the NASA SMAP mission. Those of you who do work in soil moisture estimation and sensing would recognize that. All right. Another project, once again, to just give you an idea of the kind of technology-driven work that we do, is this one, which we are currently engaged in. This is an ADB-funded project for the Irrigation, Punjab Irrigation Department, where we are looking at ways to improve canal irrigation management through remote sensing-based decision support. So we are basically developing a decision support tool. While doing that, we have to do remote sensing based crop classification. A lot of real-time measurements are happening. So the intervention is being done in the LBDC area where we are piloting this. And the idea is to have real-time flow measurements and real-time soil moisture measurements, say, for example, and also remote sensing based modeling of the soil moisture dynamics. And knowing the demand of what is happening at the farms, at the fields, we want to time the releases in a way that should be more time efficient, it should be more water efficient, it should increase water productivity, and so on and so forth. So this again is a very, very exciting project with in collaboration with some partner organizations, as you can see here, where we are leveraging some of these technologies. So once again, I mean, these portfolio of things that I've shown you, most of them, they fall under the catalog of this demand side management. And once again, the policymaker would ask, well, okay, so you have proposed all of these things, you are working on this, will this work? I mean, 10 years down the road, whatever that you are trying to come up with, whether it is an economic intervention or a technology-based intervention, I mean, is this going to work or not? Now, this is where I will now turn to the main sort of topic of the seminar, where I will sort of walk you through 2 or 3 examples of where we have started to look at exactly this question of human-water interactions. You basically bring in a certain technology, and then how do people respond, and then how do you even begin to look at what will happen? How will people adopt at these technologies, and whether these will bring about any change or not? So when I presented to you this, for example, this water accounting tool that we are developing for the Punjab Irrigation Department, one can actually now review that this is the irrigation system in the Indus Basin, very large scale, as Dr. Ashraf mentioned in the very opening presentation, the largest contiguous irrigation network in the world, very, very hierarchical as well. And at each hierarchy, whether it is these are the primary channels or the secondary channels or the tertiary channels, I mean, there is actually quite a lot happening. For example, at the very tertiary level of this system, which by the way is depicted here, I mean, the farmers are actually just collaborating with each other or agreeing on how to share water, or maybe some sort of a rotation program or a Varabandi program is there. That basically governs how water releases are made possible and how they are taken to the field. Similarly, at the primary channels and the secondary channels, irrigation managers they are constrained by the various institutions and mechanisms of water releases. What I just wanted to point out again, the scales that you may have seen in other presentation as well. What I want you to just sort of look at is the red figure. that at the tertiary level, there are about 107,000 such outlets throughout this Indus Basin. So there are about 100,000 such systems or subsystems where dozens of farmers are actually collaborating, and they are sharing a water course and then coming up with some sort of a way to share water. So this is a huge system, and mostly we are flying blind because even with the very advanced telemetry and other interventions that people are thinking about collecting data, looking at these systems, these 100,000 systems simultaneously, this is beyond the capability of even the current technology. All right. Now, within this challenge, what we started to take a look at was that so the water distribution currently is, of course, very, very rigid. These are supply-based distribution rosters, just weekly schedules of when the water will be released in a particular channel. It does not take into account the actual on-farm water demand. So people basically have entitlements, and then water is released irrespective of what you are growing, the crop type as well as the current state of the crop. And then of course that creates a lot of inequity. There are other issues in the system that creates this inequity. Those are both systematic as well as operational. There is unreliability, of course, in the system. And then, as I mentioned at the very beginning, the whole idea of a fixed tariff, that is also there, which does not allow for the appropriate maintenance, operation and maintenance of these systems. So what we started to look at was just take out just one small system. And this again sounds very counter intuitive and sort of maybe not the right way to go forward, because when you have 107,000 such systems, then why pick one? But as you will see shortly why. So we just picked one system, and then so this is small Moza in Okara in the Punjab province, and then we started to look at its Warabandi, how the water is being distributed. And what the question that we posed was that in the presence of these new interventions, like the ability to collect data about surface level flow, the ability to know what is the soil moisture at the farms, and then the ability to communicate this information. So the new development, which is the ability to collect information, can we leverage that to perhaps come up with some sort of a new allocation mechanism that can improve on any of the agreed upon irrigation performance indices? So we did that, and we proposed, say, one bidding-based water allocation mechanism. This was more demand-driven, and we looked at the standard Warabandi as opposed to this bidding mechanism. And then we found some improvements as well, as you can see from some of these charts here. And this was a paper that recently came out. So the main conclusion was that this proposed mechanism, it helps decrease groundwater pumping as well as conserve surface water. On the cost side of things were not as as promising as on the conservation side of things, but still, by changing the ways in which allocation was happening, we were seeing some improvements in particular irrigation performance indices. Now we have taken this work further, and in the further work, what we have done is that, again, for this very little system, we have run these imaginary Monte Carlo kind of simulations, hundreds of thousands of runs, if you want to call that, and doing lots and lots of scenarios, like, for example, playing with scarcity, playing with different kind of bidding mechanisms. And these are the kind of plots that we get. So what we do is that we plot each of these scenarios in which we look at the equity. So if there are, like, for example, 24 farmers who are sharing a particular system, and there are X number of weeks in a cropping season, and then via this imaginary run of water releases, well, what is going to be the equity at the very end? And then, of course, that's not the only irrigation performance index that we are interested in. We look at complementary parameters, like, for example, network reliability, say, and then we try to plot it. So on this plot, the ideal situation is on this corner, where we want to achieve maximum reliability and maximum equity. And as you can see here that some of these simulations, they are pointing towards this. Now, these scatter plots are in one color, they depict the simulations in one particular allocation scheme. And then this purple scatter plot is basically just these outcomes for another kind of allocation scheme. The gist of this all is that we really have captured the playing field, that what is the realm of possibility of if you change these bidding kind of mechanisms or any kind of mechanisms, just including the standard rotation based Warabandi system. I mean, how can you improve things? I mean, what are really the limits? And if you can introduce new mechanisms, can you push these scatter plots down and towards this right hand side to get improvement? So we now have a systematic way of coming up with how do you compare one intervention against the another. And once again, I remind that most of this is information driven. The presence of sensors, the presence of remote sensing tools, the assumption that farmers now have access to data, they have smartphones or just regular phones where they are receiving these irrigation advisory services. And with these companies who are now coming up and providing these kind of services, can we leverage them in a way to move our system towards the right hand side? So coming back, it's not just that it's one system that we looked at very, very carefully, but in doing that, we have come up with sort of a general idea of what all of these 100,000 systems can be, which direction should they be pushed towards. Um, this idea of looking at behavior of how people respond to, for example, bids. In the previous chart, what I did not mention was that when we propose certain mechanisms, there are all sorts of behavioral kind of things that emerge. For example, people, when asked about their demands, their water demands, they will not always be forthcoming in telling the bidding authority about their exact water shortage. They may actually inflate it, and so all of these things are actually incorporated. And this is to be expected because we are human beings. Farmers also human beings. They behave in certain ways, and a lot of social psychology literature actually tell us what these water users they are predicted to do. I just wanted to point out that this interaction between these water and people, they broadly fall under this discipline, which we have explored quite a bit at the center. This is, for those who do not know, this is called Socio-Hydrology. So we ran a whole seminar series last semester on socio-hydrology. Again, I wanted to advertise this because, again, there's an excellent seminar series that we are part of this currently. And those of you who have missed this one, so they can go to this link. All of these talks are available. And we got many distinguished speakers for this seminar series, which was around this theme that you basically propose some sort of an intervention, and then how do people kind of respond. And if you look at this literature of this social hydrology literature, once again you can see that there is very prominently there is this coupling which is emphasized, that in all of these water systems, whether these are canal systems or these groundwater, they interact with human subsystems as well. So the society itself is a major component, and then the hydrological part is a component. And via these complex interactions is when some surprises come up. What I've tabulated here is once again taken from a survey on social hydrology. Many of the social hydrological phenomena. We have not looked at all of them, but what is really remarkable about many of these things or many of these phenomena that researchers have pointed out to, that there is this a whole business of unintended consequences. And this goes back to the question that I started with, that you start with a certain intervention, you come up with a gadget, you come up with a technology, you come up with a certain model, and in all your honesty and in all your honest, you place it into the into the field, but things do not turn out the way that they are supposed to be. So this actually pops up again and again and again. And one of these unintended consequences that I wanted to talk a little bit more about is this whole idea of the so-called irrigation efficiency paradox. Now, this is closely related to high efficiency irrigation systems that we talked about. People talk about drip and people talk about canal lining and laser leveling, and we've also shown you these soil moisture sensors that can supposedly help the farmers conserve water. Um, what researchers have found is that these interventions have happened in many places around the world. And the hope of all of these policymakers was that as you have made these investments, and literally billions of dollars have been invested into these water saving interventions, what you would hope is that down the road, there will be some water that will be saved for the system. And that can be rerouted for other uses, for example, industrial uses. But that has not happened. In fact, high efficiency rarely reduces water consumption. And in fact, your water footprint actually becomes larger. So, I mean, this is a review article in Science Journal where this was pointed out to. But this is a very well-known phenomenon. And if you take a look at that, what really goes on here? So let me actually just walk you through this little chart, which actually explains this just a little bit. So you make some sort of an on-farm irrigation efficiency improvement. So this is the starting point. Now farmers, they behave as humans do. Sometimes they fall into the so-called rent-seeking behavior, which is that once they see that they have water available in excess of their needs, they don't necessarily not take the water which is not useful to them, but they really divert that water to other uses. So what can they do? Well, they would increase their irrigation area. So if they are saving water on a particular crop, or they would shift to some sort of a more water intensive crop. So all of these things are possible. If they don't do that, then of course there is going to be a decrease in basin-wide water consumption, and that would be what the policymaker would be hoping for. But as these people have pointed out in many examples around the world, what has happened is that the farmers do actually delve into this, and that actually leads to this paradox that the original intention was really to save water, to have a smaller footprint, and make this water which was being diverted, for example, towards the agricultural sector, recover it somehow and make it available to other sectors. But that does not happen. So we have done some work into this area, and what we have done is that so the irrigation efficiency paradox is not our invention, of course. I mean, this is very well known. What we have done is that we have looked at dynamical models of how these consequences emerge and how one can capture them, and especially focusing on Pakistan. We want to take a look at that when we are making these investments into these high efficiency irrigation systems. Can we educate our policymakers into some danger areas, so to speak? So I do not have the time to go into the model itself, but just to emphasize that once again, these models have a very strong kind of a social submodel and a very strong hydrological submodel. So you basically couple the hydrology with the social behavior, and this is where you start to see these couplings, these unintended consequences, these socio-hydrological behaviors that are not just explainable by, say, just an economist alone or a hydrologist alone. You really have to look at these interactions to be able to look at these things. So the regular water balance, recoverable water, and so on and so forth. So this would be in this component, and this is very well studied in the water literature. But when you talk to the economists, they are mostly talking about this. That you increase irrigation efficiency, and then you have the rent-seeking behavior, and then what does that happen? But rarely do you see both of these things coupling with each other. So we took a look at that, and then we developed our dynamical model. Again, this paper came out in Water Resources Research in last December, and what we found was that there was this peculiar behavior where, so on the y-axis, what we are plotting is recoverable water, and on the x-axis, it's the time. Here it is non-dimensionalized. You can think in terms of years and decades here. This is a very slow kind of a process. And what happens is that in the short term, as the policymakers are hoping for, or as these the donor agencies and the government agencies and the irrigation managers are hoping for, so for the short term, there is really some sort of benefit that you do have recoverable water. But then as time goes on and when this sort of rent seeking of the farmers actually kicks in, this so-called paradox starts to kick in, where the recoverable water actually starts to go back, and eventually there is this kind of escalation. What we have done in our this published work is that we have taken data sets, global data sets from all around the world, where we have looked at so pick any basin in the world or any part where irrigation is happening, and we have tried to program this the hydrological balance as well as the social part, and we have tried to pick hotspots of where the occurrence of these paradoxes are sort of more plausible. And this is published work, as I said. And right now we are trying to sort of localize this work or regionalize this work to Pakistan itself. And really the hope is that we can actually tell our policymakers, say in Punjab or in Sindh or wherever they are making huge investments in high efficiency irrigation systems, that where are the places to watch out for and where the occurrence of these paradoxes are more likely to occur. So again, these are some results. Okay, now finally, I would like to very quickly give an overview of, well, once you have these kind of insights, now what can you do with that? What we have done is that we have contributed towards the development of a integrated assessment model or a tool. This is called the so-called Nexus tool, NEST. It's a multi-scale modeling tool that has an energy model for the Indus. It also has a hydrological model. The hydrological model is really at a very high scale, so this is not very useful for annual planning, but that is not really the purpose of the model as well. What we really want to look at is really how sectors interact. So once again, this whole idea of unintended consequences or various kind of investments, all of these, for example, demand side solutions or even supply side solutions that you have, how can you pick the best combination of various investments to get to a particular socioeconomic kind of an objective. So some sort of a multi-criteria optimization that we need. So this is some work that we have done towards this, published now in collaboration with IASA. This is one organization where this tool was developed, and we made some contributions. So what we have done is that not only that we have contributed to the development of the original tool, we have also used the tool to ask particular questions. So if you recall at the and in the earlier part of the presentation, I was kind of sort of comparing supply side solutions with demand based solutions. And as you know, that there is a very big investment in dams, in hydropower, in storage that is currently happening in Pakistan, which as I said, I mean, is necessary because we really need more storage into the system to protect us against climate change impacts and so on and so forth. But at the same time, is that the best sort of investment in money, especially if you have these demand side solutions as well? So what is really the best combination? And what we have done is that this is again a work that is currently under review in environmental science and policy. We have generated various scenarios, like for example, checking out policy mechanisms related to conservation, smart irrigation, hydropower penetration, or even changing cropping patterns. So all of the things that we talked about at the very beginning, but really also comparing them with investments in hydropower as well. And what we have found out are optimal combinations of where should we be making those kind of investments. So it is really about balancing those investments. Now this tool is really in its infancy at this stage. I would really like to invite the community to adopt this tool, to make it more sort of functional and realize. It's a great platform for making future studies on the Indus. And really, the need is to localize it to make it more realistic and so on and so forth. So, I mean, the figures that I'm showing on the slide, they by themselves may not be very significant, but really it just demonstrates the ability of the model to give you some idea of how can you actually go forward to look at investments, water, where the water is going to be put at, energy, emissions. I mean, all of these things can be explored within. Okay, now I think we have circled back. I what I've sort of gone through this presentation is basically kind of just provoke you into thinking of looking at the various demand management solutions, but not just the interventions themselves, but really to take any of these interventions and to think about what will really happen long term. So once you introduce the intervention, in 10 years, in 20 years, in 30 years, is that intervention going to really change the water sector? Is really going to give us conservation? Is really going to be environmentally sustainable? And for that, we need more work. For that, we need more analytical tools, more models, more wisdom. And I will close off with just this final slide, which is a piece of wisdom that I really like. So this is taken from a very old manuscript, Circle of Justice. So I'll just read it. The world is a garden, and the fence of it is the dynasty. So this is a training manual for kings of the old ancient times. The dynasty is authority. The customs are a way of governing. The sovereign is a shepherd. The soldiers are the helpers. Money is livelihood. The flock are slaves. Justice is a norm, and it is alive in the world, and the world is a garden. So it is also organized in this kind of a circle. And I think this is the kind of thinking that we need to bring back, where we connect, as we have seen, water, technology, people into one circle, and hopefully a circle that promotes justice, equity, and other ideals that we strive for. So that's all from my side. I'll be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Muhammad Abubakr Saab. It was really good talk. A lot of experiences, a lot of projects that you and your institute had been doing. You shared it. It's definitely a lot of information dissemination. I would now like the audience to kindly raise your hands, and I would let Benazir, or a PhD student, to entertain the question and answers. Um,
Okay, so thank you very much, sir, for your nice talk. Now we have some participants. Please raise your hand. I think we have
I
Huram.
could see Khurram Khan was the first one. We would
Yes.
apologize if we could not honor your, the way you raise your hands, because we don't see really who first raised the hand. So, and I think you will understand that, but we'll just pick the way we saw it. Khurram Khan, can you please go ahead with your question, please, or comments, whatever you want.
Thank you very much, Doctor. I'm Engineer Khurram Khan from Army Corps of Engineers, and it's very interesting, and I'm very grateful to providing me with this opportunity, and I'm continuously attending these lectures. I have a background in wetlands, graduate from UW Madison. I've worked with the hydrological models. I ask two questions?
Yes, sure. As far as we don't have
Okay,
any
good.
other questions.
Okay. Thank you very much. My first question is actually a concern, which I share with my students in NUST as well, and I would share with the doctor, the guest speaker as well. It is regarding the implementation part of the policy. As of my knowledge, and you all know, there is a federal law in US which says no net loss to the wetland, and that according to that law, you cannot do any new construction, any development until unless you take care of anything which is existing in the nature. So it's a beautiful system. We have water vision policies, we have water policy made and well drafted. But the problem lies once we end up at the implementation level. So a very beautiful picture has been given, and I'm really happy and very lucky to have attended today's seminar. In Okada, Dr. Saab has carried out a research, and we have found and we have come up with some solution which looks like a very good solution to the problem. But what will happen to this solution until and unless it is not implemented? And in science, we are doing science, we are doing engineering. It's very good. It's very heartening. But honestly speaking, even in our own institutional levels, we are unable to implement those things which we do in our labs. So what is the way out for Dr. Saab to bring these things to the policymakers? How can we force them to do whatever is good for them? This is my first question. Next, if I get a chance, I will ask the next question. Thank you very much, sir.
जी मेरे ख्याल में I think you have asked the wrong
Yes,
person
I will
about
only ask one
the
question.
questions, but your comments are very well taken, sir. हाँ जी जी please sir आगे. जी.
Yeah, it's very important to reach the policymakers, because I think that was more regarding the regulation, the way how it works, because we can see from Dr. Ashraf's talk that there is certainly no regulation. There is no any mechanism for how the tube wells should be dug, how the water has to be distributed. So I think that was Khurram Saab was talking about that. It was more like a comment. Benazir, do you have any other question?
Yes, sir.
Yeah,
We have
a
from Pakistan. I think from Pakistan.
Qasim Jan sir,
Qasim Jan, sir.
probably.
Please unmute your mic, sir. You can ask the question.
May I?
Yes. Yes.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. First of all, I would like to thank the speaker for a very nice and wonderful scientific presentation, some of which I couldn't follow because I'm not very good in maths. But anyway, secondly, I would very much like to welcome our great friend, the great friend of Pakistan and my personal friend, Professor Matthias Weniger, who is with us. He is also going to present a paper. Matthias has contributed tremendously to Pakistan study of glaciers, and I'm sure that you would in the long run enjoy his talk. But now I come to the question, and the question, rather confusion, is that the speaker said that a smart irrigation system in the long run does not yield the desired results. I would like to be educated more on this point, please.
जी जी बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. And in fact you heard it perfectly perfectly well. This is a big surprise to many of us. In fact, this does not happen all the time. What these people who call it as the irrigation efficiency paradox, what they have observed is, and let me actually just repeat that part of the presentation, because really it is very paradoxical as they call it, and it is really thought provoking as well, that in many regions around the world, very well-meaning investments into high efficiency irrigation systems, water conservation technologies, they have not yielded the desired results, not because there is anything wrong with the technology itself. So for example, if you have a farm and if you are growing wheat and if you have come up with a certain technology to save water, so of course the water is going to be saved. But then the saved water, where is that going? So that is what the question is all about. So for someone who is releasing water into the channel for growing the wheat, I mean, it is still going into the channel. And what the farmer actually does is that it actually engages into a behavior where the availability of this extra water or whatever, they will use it, for example, to increase their irrigated areas or to switch to some sort of another kind of a intensive crop. Now, when they started to look at this behavior, and example after example, in China, in Argentina, in many places, they have seen this. There is a solution as well. And I think this may be related to what Khurram Saab was saying earlier on. So I'm sorry कि मैं आपकी वो Khurram Saab आपकी बात को बढ़ा नहीं सका, but now I'm thinking that perhaps I can contribute a little bit. That the solution to that really is monitoring. That once again, you deploy that technology to do some sort of a monitoring, as they call it. So it's not just sufficient to do a farm level intervention, but really you have to simultaneously invest into infrastructure for monitoring these releases as well. So if you do that, then this irrigation efficiency paradox can be averted. So what the thing for us to learn is not that this is a deterministic thing, that whatever that we are doing is going to be wasted. No, not at all. What the caution is that if you are doing such investments, then you simultaneously invest into monitoring technologies as well. And only by doing that, you will be able to reap benefits out of these investments. So I hope I've been able to make it a little bit clear and give some hope as well. I think maybe I sounded a little bit pessimistic in my presentation.
We have
Okay.
Professor Shahid Azam Sab from Saskatchewan, Regina, University of Regina. Sir, please.
Thank you very much. I really enjoyed your presentation. It's almost midnight here in Regina, but I made it a point that I'll be awake to listen to this lovely presentation of yours. I have a very simple question, and it is related to losses from a hydrological perspective. What kind of losses in the Indus Basin are the predominant ones, and especially related to not just surface water going into the canal system, but also natural losses in terms of infiltration, in terms of evaporation and evapotranspiration, and can you give us a sense of which ones are the dominant ones? Thank you very much.
Okay, that's a great question. Let me actually see if I can bring up the slide once again, because that will help me answer the question. Okay, so Shahid Sab, can you see the slide now?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay.
Thank you.
So on this slide, this is the water budget, so to speak. And what happens is that once the water comes into, let me actually just use the laser pointer as well. So once the inflows come into the farm endowment, this is where the water gets split up into what is applied on the farm. Again, if I'm sounding like I'm just repeating what you already know, please stop me. But maybe for the sake of the audience, this can be educational. The applied water, it basically can be split into what the plants transpire, as well as what maybe the weeds and other parts of the field are transpiring. So this is a kind of a loss. But this whole thing is the consumed fraction. Now, whatever is left is the return flow, the so-called return flow. And this is what I was kind of focusing in this irrigation efficiency paradox, that the hope is that if from the farm endowment, if the water that is being applied, that can be lessened, then much of this water can return as a return flow back into the system. Whether you have some sort of a recovery mechanism or not, I mean, that is beside the point. But if that goes back, then you can increase the usage. Now, people have actually looked at all of these figures. Unfortunately, I do not have the slide. I should have maybe brought it with me, where all of these are calculated. So for the irrigation, the Indus Basin, we know these figures, where the losses are happening. And in fact, that is why the whole emphasis is on this part, that because we know that out of the water applied and and looking at what the actual need of the crops is, there is a big incentive really to conserve on this side. So this is why this motivates investments into conservation on these efficiency kind of technologies. But the losses are the big losses actually here. There are conveyance losses from the bulk irrigation system, for example, along the canals as well. They are a little bit of I won't say controversy, but really a difference of opinion among experts is that the water that is seeping from these canals down into the aquifer, some people, they actually call that as losses, because really they are not being deployed to the field. But some people do not, because whatever is seeping down into the aquifer, that may later be pumped out and can be reused as well. And in fact, that can actually be beneficial as well, because if the surface water is not available, then the groundwater can come to your rescue as well. But in places where the water is brackish or where the quality is not very good, so of course that is a loss. So it depends on, it's very, very localized. But in Punjab, in many, in most areas, this is very well studied. So if you need the actual figures, I can actually give you the figures as well. But really people do focus on this part, where people think that because of our irrigation practices, there are big losses which are happening at the farm, below the farm gate. and this is where our focus should be. A lot has happened on the bulk irrigation delivery losses part. Lining has, for example, happened. That was very much along those lines. But really down the farm gate, on the fields, this is still very, very inefficient. And the irrigation efficiency paradox just cautions you that you do these investments in a careful way, but these investments really are needed, and we can actually conserve quite a bit of water from this part.
Okay, Khurram, we will just bypass you because you have already asked one question. We will go to Matthias Weniger. Sir, you can ask your question.
Yes. First of all, many thanks to Kazim Jan. He said some very nice words, which I'm not sure whether they are true, but was nice anyway. Second point, I'm really impressed by this contribution. It was an excellent contribution. I learned a lot. I made many notes. I will study it again. But I still have one question, or maybe a range of questions. You did not mention the demographic development of Pakistan. It is considered, well, whether it's true or not, that within the next maybe 20, 30 years, we have the double population number. So it will certainly contribute to vulnerability, to marginalization, maybe urbanization. How do you consider these aspects in your studies? I didn't see it up to now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Professor Winiger, and you are absolutely right that demography is a very, very important factor. That is the denominator in any computation that you are doing. In the work that we have done so far, we have not looked at that, of course, because. But in the very last part of the presentation, where I was presenting to you this tool, this Nexus tool, there it can be coupled. In fact, it is driven by that. So what happens is that you look at multi-decade kind of projections into the various sectors, and of course you have to use some sort of a demographic tool to predict how the demands are actually increasing. So indirectly it is there, but you are absolutely right that we in the Indus Basin we really do need experts that are demography experts. We know that these demographic models are actually not so simple. We have been using very simple ones because for our purposes. But the point is very well taken that when we talk about the numerator in the scarcity equation, it's actually the denominator which is really dominant.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Khurram Khan, now you can unmute your mic and please ask the question.
Thank you very much for giving me another chance. My question basically is an academic question from Dr. Abubakr. Sir, I have little experience in dealing with the hydrological model like FECOM and SWA model for the wave interaction. So my question is, I went through your abstract and try to understand this agent-based modeling a little bit. So to my understanding, we design the data structure, and then we describe the rules, and then we even design the environment, and then let the variables play in the social domain and whatever the model will do. So there is always a possibility of bias in the statistical term as we see in other models. So we can't overrule that. So my question is, how we ensure that once we run such models in the social domain, they are above the bias, and if there is a bias, so how is that bias eliminated and then reported? Because anything which happens in the social domain, if it is biased, so I know in the statistical models we represent them with some figures or some kind of percentage, but here in social domain, how is that done? It's basically an academic question, sir. Thank you.
जी बिल्कुल बिल्कुल. The social models are actually very different from these hydrological models. तो आपके जो physical models हैं, I mean they are. I mean we also work with some of those physical models as well, and we do understand that calibration and biases. This is a big part of it. whenever you you bring in the analytics into a social model, first of all, it is highly controversial. So many of the sociologists, they actually don't like it at all, whether you can even write down an equation. So for us, when we talk about coupling the very physical model with kind of a very analytical social model, just keep in mind that there are some people who don't even agree with this idea at all. So in the model that I showed you, we brought in, for example, the rent-seeking behavior. And we introduce the rent-seeking behavior via a very a simple parameter, like a switch that you are now. What is that? I mean, that alpha that you saw in the model, which was basically low for very nice farmers and for very high for farmers that are very sort of aggressive in their rent-seeking behavior. Some economists will just throw that out, or psychologists will just throw that out. But keep in mind that the objective of these social models is not really to capture reality. The objective is really to have a conceptual framework to really build in these causal effects. So you do this and then this happens. This is why scales are not so important. I mean, you can have, for example, the irrigation efficiency paradox as one example, which is emerging at a particular place. That is not a prediction. It is just a caution that you do not exactly know what the farmers in Okada are actually thinking. It is just an imaginary exercise that if, for example, they start to think in a certain way, then this can happen. So really, we should not make a direct analogy between the social models, the models of social processes, and the mathematical models or of the hydrological processes in such a way.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir.
I
Now,
think that's pretty much it. Do we have any other question, Benazir?
No, sir. We don't have any other questions
No.
from the audience.
Okay, so I think this is end of the today's talk, and can you kindly advertise the talk for upcoming Wednesday? So this is Professor Shahid Azam Saab from University of Regina, Canada. Dr. Saab will be talking about water management in agriculture and mining. So we really invite you all, and we are looking forward for your presence in this talk, which is going to take place on February 16th, Wednesday. Now we will have a group photo, and after that, you're okay to head onto your beds or whatever, in whichever time zones you are.
Dr. Irfan, if you allow me, I would really just very quickly like to thank all the organizers of this talk, especially Dr. Qasim Jan Saab, who reached out, and of course, Irfan Saab, Mukhtiar Saab, and all of the organizers. I think this is a wonderful series. I've been watching all the previous episodes as well, and very much looking forward to the next talk by Shahid Saab, as well as all the upcoming episodes. So congratulations.
Abubakr Saab, we would really appreciate if we could receive the flyers of the seminars or webinars you advertised in your talk. So we would like to distribute that, so that people get as much benefit, you know. So yeah, we will now head on for a group photo, and after that, I'll say bye to everyone, and thank you very much. Can you come to the group photo mode, Benazir?
Yes, sir.
Big clap, huh? Thank you.
Yeah.
We are done, sir. Okay.
Okay. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.